neither there is a division within the Atma, making it multiple Atmas, nor there is something other than Atma, making Atma a dual. Dual means one of the two. So, Atma Ekatva, it wants to teach that consciousness alone is one and all alone. And there is nothing other than it. Everything else is kalpitam, adhyastam, for not being able to understand Atma as pure consciousness, and it alone is. You start seeing something as different. You start seeing anatma. You start seeing multiplicity only because one is not aware of the absolute Atma. Okay, so this was the point. To this, Purvapakshi raised certain objections. Mainly it is against Advaita. Those who raise against Advaita, objections against Advaita are generally Vishishtadvaitins and Dvaitins. So it is a mostly of Vishishtadvaitins, Dvaitins argument alone. Now the next point, 67th passage. Chinmatra vastu siddhihi. Now yattu uchyate. So certain arguments that he has put forward. So one more argument, he says, consciousness. We have in our previous class, that is day before yesterday, I just touched the argument and we have to reply today. So I just repeat that argument. Yattu uchyate chinmatram vastu nastyeva. He stated, the Purvapakshi said, there is no pure consciousness at all. Because the words which are referring to consciousness, the words that refer to consciousness like samvit, anubhava, jnana, see, anubhava, jnana, samvit, chaitanyam, samvit, anubhava, jnana, chit, chaitanyam, etc. All these words, shabdanam atmagunavachakatvat, he says these words refer to the quality of consciousness, not pure consciousness. See, these words refer to what we call jnanam, the consciousness, and anubhava, samvit, all these things refer to the a quality of consciousness. Okay. And therefore, there is no such thing called pure consciousness. There is no such thing called pure consciousness. Jnaturapyatmano navikaritvam. Then moreover, the consciousness or the Atman who is Jnata only. Jnaturapyatmanaha. Atma by his nature is only a Jnata. This is what Purvapakshi told. That Ramanujacharya's Paksham was even Madhva and everybody, all non-Advaitins say, consciousness is Jnata. Atma is Jnatru only. Jnatru means the knower, who is related to something. They say Atma is by his very nature Jnatru. Atma is not a pure consciousness. What Advaitins say is Atma is a Sakshi. By Sakshi we mean pure consciousness and there is nothing other than it. Okay. So like in deep sleep. In deep sleep there is only Atma, all alone. The consciousness is all alone. So, Jnaturapyatmano navikaritvam. Atma who is Jnata. If Advaitin objected, if Atma is only a Jnatru, he will be subject to change. Okay. He would be a subject to change because Jnatru, a knower, keeps on knowing things. As his knowledge keeps on changing, his knowledge keeps on fluctuating, isn't it? Knowledge keeps on fluctuating. He keeps on knowing many things. Therefore, the knower also keeps varying, keeps fluctuating. A knower, if Atma were only Jnatru, he can't remain changeless. This is Advaitin subjection. If Atma were, I repeat again, if Atma were purely Jnatru alone, he cannot remain changeless. Jnatru who is aware of things, his knowledge keeps fluctuating, goes up and down, he also undergoes a change. Therefore, Atma is not Jnatru. Atma is pure consciousness or Sakshi. This was Advaitin's argument. Against this argument, Purvapakshi says, no, Atma, even if he is Jnatru, see, Atma, even if he is Jnatru, Atman who is none other than the knower, Atma, even if he is Jnatru alone, he is not pure consciousness, only Jnatru. Even if he is Jnatru, he doesn't become Vikari, is not subject to change. It doesn't become Vikari. Because, why? Vedantins told, Advaitins told, that if Atma were Jnatru, the knowledge keeps rising and fluctuating up and down, waxing and waning, like the moon. So, Jnatru also undergoes a change. Purvapakshi says, no. Even if he is Jnatru, there is no need to change. Because his quality, because Jnatru's knowledge of the Jnata, Jnatru means Jnata. The knowledge of the Jnata is a quality. The quality, if the Jnanam Jnatru acquires, if the Jnanam Jnatru acquires, keeps changing, Jnatru changes. He says, the Jnanam Jnatru acquires is eternal. See, Jnanam being eternal, the Jnatru, one who is the owner of Jnanam, one who is the knower of Jnanam or is the owner of Jnanam, one who is the possessor of Jnanam. If the Jnanam fluctuates, the possessor of Jnanam, he will also fluctuate. Therefore, he will be Vikaritvam. This was Advaitins. And the Purvapakshi says, it is okay. Atma is a Jnatru. Jnatru is not pure consciousness, but a possessor of consciousness. See, he admits Atma is Jnatru. He possesses Jnanam. Both he admits, yet he is not changeless. Yet he is changeless. Atma, although he is Jnatru, he is changeless. See, what a Ascharyam thing. Although Atma is Jnatru, he is changeless. Why? Because if the Jnanam were to change, Jnatru would change, the possessor of Jnanam would change. But we are admitting that Jnanam is eternal, means Jnanam as a quality. Consciousness as a quality of Atma being eternal. See, consciousness as a quality of Atma being eternal, the possessor of the Jnanam, the Jnatru also will remain eternal, unchanging. Okay? He will also remain unchanging. You see how he says. For this was Purvapakshi. Now the Siddhanti says, Siddhanti answers, no. Tad jnatrutvasya adhyasa purvakatva varnanenaiva parihutaprayam. We have already, it is as good, it becomes refuted. Okay, it gets refuted. It can be treated as already refuted when the knowership was described as due to superimposition, as adhyasa. The very Jnatrutvam was explained before, has shown before as due to Adhyasa. The very Jnatrutvam, Pramatrutvam is due to Adhyasa. If Pramatrutvam is due to Adhyasa, then Pramatru keeps changing and everything is okay. Atma is not Pramatru. Atma is not Jnatru. Atma is pure consciousness. Therefore, this Purvapakshi's idea that Atma is Jnatru, the possessor of knowledge by his nature, gets refuted when we said that the very Jnatrutvam is due to Adhyasa. Okay. Tad Jnatruttvasya Adhyasa-purvatvaka varnanenaiva parihurtaprayam, because guna-guninoscha guna-guninoschitoho bheda anirupanat, because guna-guni, this difference between guna and guni is not proven, is not yet established. Is not yet established. That means consciousness as a, see, consciousness has got a two. One is consciousness as a quality and consciousness as a possessor of the quality. This same consciousness having a two forms, and one being a possessor of it, another is a possessed one. One is the Atma, another is the possessor of, one is a Chaitanya Atma, another is a possession of, another is quality of Atma. I mean quality of consciousness. One is a Chaitanya Atma and Chaitanya Gunaha. Let us say like this. Chaitanya Atma and Chaitanya Gunaha. This difference that there are two, these two cannot be established. It is a false creation. It is a false imagination. There are no two things called Chaitanya Atma and Chaitanya Gunaha. Chaitanya Atma, Chaitanya Gunaha don't exist separately. Allave. Chaitanya Atma and Chaitanya Gunaha. This division, Guna-guni bhava, quality and qualified. Quality is a one, and one who is a possessor of quality. Guna-guni, quality and possessor of quality. See, guna-guninoh chitoh bheda anirupanat. Because, the reason because, you cannot show how, you show me, you are unable to show. Nobody can show how a quality of consciousness is different from the Atma who is consciousness. Atma, which is consciousness, and the quality of consciousness, how can you show the difference? Show me. How do you point out the difference between them? This is only falsely imagined as a two things where there are no two things. It is only one consciousness alone. So, nirupane vachit bhinnasya jadatvat. Suppose nirupana means if you examine, you cannot see them differently. But if you examine, if you start watching, if you probe little deeply into it, what happens is, on examination, one finds that what is different from consciousness is only insentient. If Atma is consciousness, and if the conscious Atma, Chaitanya Atma, is seeing something, can Chaitanya Atma see another one as a quality of Chaitanya Guna? Consciousness as quality, as a Chaitanya Guna. Can Chaitanya Atma see another Chaitanyam as a quality of it? If Atma sees another one, that becomes Anatma. If Atma objectifies, Atma knows something, Atma means consciousness. If you can know the Chaitanya Gunaha, consciousness as quality. If you know the consciousness as a quality, if you know it, that becomes unconscious, that becomes insentient, because Chaitanyam is objectifying. What Chaitanyam objectifies becomes automatically insentient, because one consciousness cannot objectify another consciousness, isn't it? How can consciousness know another consciousness? Can consciousness objectify consciousness? Can light illumine another light? Light illumining another light is meaningless, isn't it? Therefore, Atma knowing, If Atma knows, Atma means Chaitanya. If Chaitanya Atma knows, it automatically becomes insentient. Therefore, see, Chid Bhinnasya Nirupaneva Chid Bhinnasya Jadatvat. What is, if Chaitanyam can know it, if Chaitanyam can know it, it becomes Achetanam. Once it is Achetanam, and that Achetanam, that insentient thing cannot constitute a quality of Chaitanya Atma. See, and what is different from consciousness is only insentient, and that consciousness cannot be its quality. Okay. Tadharmatvanupapattehe. Adu, what is insentient cannot constitute quality of the Atman, quality of Atman, because what Atma knows becomes insentient. How can the insentient become a quality? How can Achetana become the quality of Chaitanyam? This is a good point. If Atma knows the Chaitanya Guna, if Atma knows consciousness as a quality, then that anything that Atma knows becomes insentient. How can that insentient constitute the quality of Atma? It cannot, isn't it? Therefore, it fails. It fails. Therefore, the difference, the division of consciousness as Atma and consciousness as its quality, having two consciousnesses. One is a Atma, one is the possessor of consciousness, another is the quality of consciousness. This kind of a dividing into two, imagining these two is a false imagination. You cannot imagine like that. Tad dharmatvanupapattehe tat swarupasyaiva bhedatve. Okay. Bhedatve gunaguniropi swarupena ikya prasangat. Or if what is different from consciousness is also of the same nature. And he said, another point is, if Atma is consciousness, and what Atma knows, automatically, we have told already, what Atma knows is insentient. That argument we have stated. Now, next argument is, what Atma knows is also consciousness. And if it were not insentient, see, we have stated what Atma knows is insentient alone. Supposing what Atma knows is also sentient, that means Atma is consciousness. What Atma knows is also consciousness. Okay? Both are consciousness. That's what they are trying to say. Atma is consciousness, and the quality of Atma is also consciousness. Therefore, consciousness knows consciousness. If that is the case, just an assumption. If that is the case, so if what is different from consciousness is also of the same nature, the consciousness alone, there cannot be a relationship of quality and possessor of quality. Now, if Atma is consciousness and the quality of consciousness is also consciousness, then how can you establish relationship? In the one consciousness, how can you divide them into two? And one part of consciousness becomes the quality of another part of, it is all meaningless. See, one consciousness becomes the quality of another consciousness. This again becomes meaningless. Therefore, your argument is wrong. Tat swarupasyaiva bhedatve gunaguniropi swarupena aikya prasangat. Then guna guni, both of them become one only. Guna is also consciousness. Guni is also consciousness. That means quality is consciousness. The possessor of the quality is consciousness. Then there will be only one consciousness only. Because both would be essentially one consciousness alone. So you can't divide them again. Both would be one. If quality is also consciousness, possessor of quality also consciousness, there would be one consciousness alone. Okay. Guna bhutasya jnanasya deepaprabhadivat sankocha vikasadihi swatah eva ityangikare. Now, but Ramanujacharya told no. He says the quality, the Chaitanya Guna, the quality fluctuates. The quality fluctuates means it shrinks and expands. The quality of consciousness, that is a Chaitanya Gunam, keeps fluctuating. Fluctuating means what? It shrinks and expands. Shrink means it is a how to say that? Yeah, shrinking only. Shrinks and expands. Contraction, let us say. It contracts and expands. Okay. If the quality of consciousness undergoes contraction and expansion, the quality of see, they say in Sushupti, why there is no consciousness? Why is there no consciousness in Sushupti? We say it is not that, the Advaitins say, it is not that there is no consciousness. In fact, there is only consciousness. See the problem. The question is, in the waking state, we are conscious of things. And I know that I am here, I am awake, I am conscious. We call I am awake, I am conscious. I am conscious of certain things in life. But in Sushupti, I am not conscious. This is what common man thinks. So, see how Advaitins explain and how Vishishtadvaitins explain. Advaitins say, in Sushupti, you can't say there is no consciousness. In fact, Sushupti is all consciousness alone. Absolute consciousness. All consciousness alone through and through. Through and through, only consciousness and nothing but consciousness. Since there is nothing other than consciousness, there is no difference of knower and known duality. If the consciousness is a knower, and if there is a insentient other than conscious Atma to know, then there would be a relationship of knower-known. In Sushupti, there is no relationship of knower and known. Therefore, there is only all one consciousness. Therefore, you think that it is just a blank. It looks blank because it is all one consciousness alone. This is Advaitin's explanation. Therefore, it looks blank only from the waker's standpoint. Okay, it looks blank from the waker's standpoint. Otherwise, Sushupti is pure and absolute consciousness alone. Okay, now Vishishtadvaitins say, in waking there is consciousness. So, in waking there is consciousness. In waking there is consciousness. That consciousness is a quality of consciousness. It is an addition to Atma. Atma is conscious, no doubt, but Atma is possessing a Chaitanya Guna, a quality of consciousness. That means a consciousness as quality. Atma is consciousness as a possessor of quality, and it possesses and also knows another consciousness as a quality of it. In waking state, we have conscious Atma and consciousness as a quality sticking to it. Whereas in deep sleep, what happens? Then why don't we know if Atma is Jnata? If Atma is Jnata, if Atma is Jnatru or Jnata in Sushupti, then why is it not aware? They say the consciousness as a quality exists in Sushupti also. In waking also, in deep sleep also, consciousness as a quality, Chaitanya Gunaha. Chaitanya Guna sticking to Atma is present both in waking as well as deep sleep. Then why are we not aware of? Why don't we come to possess? Why don't we find that Chaitanya Gunaha with Atma in deep sleep? If this is the question, they answer, in waking state, the Chaitanyam quality, Chaitanyam as a quality, consciousness as a quality of Atma, they say, Purvapakshi says, Chaitanyam as a quality of Atma expands in waking state. That's why we experience consciousness here. In deep sleep, it contracts. Consciousness as a quality, that the Chaitanya Guna sticking to Atma contracts in deep sleep. Since it contracts, you are not aware. When it expands, you become aware. This explanation appears nice to people, but it is wrong. Therefore, this is a Ramanuja's Paksha. Consciousness as a quality, sticking to Atma, expands and contracts. In waking state, it expands. In deep sleep, it contracts. Okay, so expansion in waking state, similar to the contraction and expansion of a light of a lamp. Lamp expands and contracts. Have you seen that? Light contracts and expands. When light expands, it illumines all over. When it contracts, you don't feel it, because it becomes a small, like that. Light expanding, contracting. I don't know, I have never not understood. Light, Pradeepa, he says, Jnanasya Deepa Prabhavat Sankocha Vikasadihi. Light undergoes expansion and contraction. If light undergoes expansion and contraction, does light undergo? Light undergo. Okay, we may say, okay, let us say, light undergoes expansion and contraction. But light undergoes, correct, but that becomes a reverse. That example in the illustration, light contracts and expands, okay, we can accept it. Light expands and contracts. One is that illustration doesn't fit in with Atma. Illustration is totally contrary to the Atma. Therefore, illustration doesn't work. But anyway, let us discuss the very illustration. In the light of the lamp, light of a lamp contracts and expands, okay. But the contraction and expansion of the light is totally contrary to this. That illustration doesn't fit in. See, why? How it doesn't fit in? In the light, you see, the light which expands. Expands means, here you say, here is a small lamp. The light emanates from the lamp. When it emanates from the lamp, it goes, supposing there is a small lamp put in a big hall. What happens? In a big hall, you put a small lamp at a corner. Then the light goes, spreads all around the hall. When it spreads all over the hall is too big, the lamp is too small. Then what happens? When the light expands, it becomes very dim light. It becomes a dim light. More it expands, more it becomes dim. More it contracts. Contract means you put the same lamp in a small room. Only a small room like this. Then you can see better. When the light contracts, it illumines better. When it expands, it becomes dim. If it still further expands, if there is a big Maidana, in a big Maidana put a small lamp, and you see that there is no light at all. In spite of the lamp, you see everything darkness alone. So here, when the light expands, it becomes too thin and dim, a dim light. When it contracts, when the light is concentrated in one place, it can illumine better. But your example, this illustration doesn't fit in with your explanation about waking and deep sleep. He says, according to Vishishtadvaitins, what happens? In waking state, consciousness as a quality expands. Therefore, we are able to see the waking state. We are able to see the much better light because light is expanding. But deep sleep, it shrinks. But when it shrinks, it should be better visible because all light comes in one place. The light which was spreading around the big hall, when it was brought to a small room, the small lamp, when it is compressed, when the consciousness is compressed, it becomes concentrated, isn't it? When the consciousness is compressed, it becomes more concentrated. Then concentrated light illumines better, isn't it? When it is expands, it becomes what you call diffused. Okay. When it expands, it becomes diffused. When it becomes diffused, the light will be dim. Won't it be? The light will be dim when it is diffused. Therefore, in the deep sleep, if it is compressed, we should be able to see better light in deep sleep. In waking state, we should not be able to see the world. And in deep sleep alone, we should be able to see the light better. If you admit, we are explaining their argument. Their argument is, in deep sleep, consciousness as a quality, Chaitanya Gunaha gets expanded in waking state, therefore it illumines the world. In deep sleep, it gets compressed, therefore it becomes too dim, as good as non-existent, he says. But in fact, when consciousness is compressed, it should be the brighter. When it is expanded, it should become diffused. It becomes a thin and thin and thin, thinner and thinner and thinner. Then it becomes diffused and dim light. In waking state, you should have dimmer light, and deep sleep, you should have a brighter light, but it is totally opposite. He says, when consciousness is compressed, generally when light is compressed, it gives a better light, brighter. When it expands, it becomes a dimmer. But you are giving an example of a light to explain deep sleep and waking. In waking, consciousness expands. In deep sleep, it gets compressed. So, the light example of a light is going opposite to your explanation of deep sleep, waking and sleep. Opposite to the experience of waking and deep sleep, isn't it? But Advaitin's explanation is different, as I told you. In Sushupti, there is only one consciousness. There is no knower known duality. There is all consciousness alone. And in waking state, there is a knower and the known. When you know limited things, there is consciousness. When there is only limitless consciousness, it looks there is all one consciousness without knower known duality. Therefore, Sushupti looks as if it is unconscious. See, when there is only light and nothing other than light, it looks like darkness. When you have all light and there is no object to illumine, you can't see the light, isn't it? Light can be seen only when it illumines non-light, illumines insentient. Light illumines a non-light, then only if light is traveling in one direction without being obstructed by anything, without being obstructed by a opaque means a non-light, non-illuminant object like book or hand or some object. If light is traveling, continuously traveling on, there is nothing to obstruct. You won't be able to see the light. Have you noted this? Light, when it is light alone, is if there is something to obstruct the prayana of light, obstruct the passage of light, obstruct the traveling of light, then that light falls on the object and returns to your eyes. Then you see, here is a light. You see the light only when it falls on object, opaque object, and comes to you, turns to you, returns you, you start seeing it. Suppose there is only light and there is nothing to obstruct non-light, all light alone, all over, you would not be able to see. Light cannot be seen when there is only one consciousness. Okay. That's why in deep sleep, you feel that there is nothing because there is nothing. It's not that there is no consciousness. It is all consciousness alone without anything other than consciousness. It is the waking mind, it is explaining like that. Okay, so anyway, now we leave it. Now coming to the Purvapakshi's point, and he says, if he says, like the light, it expands in the waking and gets contracted or gets compressed in the deep sleep. Iti eva sankocha vikasadihi swatah eva ityangikare गुणभूतस्य ज्ञानस्य दीपप्रभादिवत् संकोच विकासादिः स्वतः एव. So consciousness undergoes gets according to Purvapakshi, it gets compressed during deep sleep and gets expanded during waking state. That's why we are seeing the world. That's why we see the consciousness in the waking state, and deep sleep there is no consciousness because it gets compressed. Okay, Angikare, Savayavatva Anityatwadi Dosha Prasakte. If you accept like that, this is a defective because the contraction and expansion are intrinsic to the quality of consciousness. If contraction and expansion, that means the consciousness as quality, Chaitanya Guna, if it gets compressed and gets expanded, if that is the case, then what happens? There will be defect of consciousness consisting of parts, because consciousness has got many parts. That's why when the parts are becoming loose, they get expanded. When the particles, part means particles. Does consciousness have particles? If the particles come closer and closer, they get compressed. Then it would mean that the consciousness is composed of many parts or many particles. Are there particles of consciousness? Then it would imply, if you accept that consciousness gets compressed and gets expanded, if that is your theory, that is theory means your theory that consciousness gets compressed in deep sleep and expanded in waking state. If this theory is to be accepted, this would be the problem, this would be the defect in it. Then it amounts to saying that the consciousness consists of many particles. When the particles move away from each other, that means when they are loosely kept, that means the distance between particles is more, then they get expanded. If the distance between the particles is lessened, particles come closer and get compressed. Then what else you mean by expanding and contraction? By getting compressed and expanded. Diffused and compression and diffusion, or expansion and contraction. What else do you mean? Like a cloth, you see. Cloth gets compressed or gets expanded. Compressed means what? The distance between the thread of the cloth will be less because they get pressed. Expanded, then they become loose. Just like you see, like this is compressed, this is expanded, because there's a lot of space in between fingers. When the lot of space, they become loosely related, they become expanded. That means you are assuming that consciousness consists of particles. That's what assumption. Your theory implies that consciousness consists of particles, but that's ridiculous. Nobody has seen, nobody has experienced such a thing. And consciousness expanding, contracting is meaningless. So that is neither logical nor it is in keeping with Anubhava. So, and also non-eternal. Secondly, if consciousness keeps on changing, fluctuating, less, sometimes more and sometimes less, that means it is a fluctuation. That means anitya, it is not eternity. Eternal means kutastha nitya, changelessly eternal. It is not eternal. Eternal means we mean changelessly eternal. Changingly surviving is different. While changingly surviving is different, we are talking eternal means changeless, kutastha, changelessly eternal. Atma is changelessly eternal, kutastha Atma. Upanishad say Atma is nirvikara. You can't maintain nirvikara, but you are claiming that Atma is nirvikara. You can't claim. In order to avoid these, 203, okay. In order to avoid these, what does the Purvapakshi say? Let us see. Time is up, but I'll just say a little bit and leave it. In order to avoid these defects, if the contraction and expansions are accepted to be due to some alien factor, see, these getting compressed and getting diffused, compressed and diffused, this compression and diffusion of consciousness, all these are lot of speculation, wild kalpana. Okay, so Adhyasa vadasya parataha ityangikare, if this contraction and expansion on the part of consciousness were not intrinsic to Atma, if it is due to some alien factor, okay, if it is due to some alien factor, Adhyasavada Svikara Prasangat, if Atma is not expanding and contracting, Atma remains nirvikara, changeless on its own. Atma, consciousness by itself remains changeless, but the fluctuation appearing in Atma is due to some alien factor, then that's what means Adhyasa. Due to alien, not intrinsic to Atma, means Adhyasa. Adhyasa means some alien is imposing on it, wrongly imposing on it. Then that will become, then it would amount to accepting Adhyasavada prasangat ayuktoyam chidgunaka chidrupatmavadaha. Then it would amount to accepting our Advaitin's Siddhanta of Atma being eternal and no fluctuation in Atma, and the fluctuation appearing in it is due to external. That's why we say the fluctuation is due to mind. It is due to mind, not in the Atma. In the Atma, there is no change. It is the mind that is expanding and contracting. Okay, mind may change. The change in the mind imposed upon the Atma appears as if consciousness is undergoing. Then that would be Advaitin's stand. Okay. Therefore, if contraction and expansion are accepted to be due to some alien factor, then you are accepting them to be superimposed. Therefore, this view that Atman is consciousness only because it possesses the quality of consciousness is inconsistent. Therefore, Atma is only Jnatru, Jnaturanyasya tasyapi Atmabhutasya sakshino apratyakheya. Okay. Chidrupa gunakatma. Then another point. Jnatuhu, I think another point is coming. We'll discuss later. Time is up. Another point is, we are continuing. We'll discuss in the next class. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om Tat Sat.